So people say stuff like, oh, you've changed. And of course, life changes. Everything changes. The weather changes. The plants grow towards the sun as the sun shifts through the sky. When the conditions change, it makes sense to harmonize with the conditions because we're part of something massive. We're one system within a broader system. So these social constructs and contracts don't necessarily flow with changes very well. It's like the social legalese, right? It's like you've got to account for everything and there's all these agreements, and when you relate that way, when you communicate that way, it feels trapping. It feels trapping. It's like there's no space for growth, right? Sorry, I'm just adjusting this. It feels trapping and like there's no space for growth. It feels like your beingness can't flow through in the way it needs to. So whenever you enter an agreement about who you are, there are a series of assumptions that often come with that. Like if I say I'm a climber, there's an assumption about how I live and what I do. If I say that I'm a writer, there's an assumption about that. If I'm a husband, there's an assumption about husbands. And all of these things are reflections of the culture around those identities. And so when we agree by calling ourselves and responding as if we are that identity, then we often tacitly or unconsciously or unspokenly agree to all of the things that come with that, or at least that's what people assume. They assume things. If I say I'm a climber, they assume things. If I say I'm a husband, they assume things. And that's how the social world works. Social conventions, right? So they have a place. They have a certain place. There's a certain way that we can organize and relate through the use of social conventions. And in fact, they can be beautiful. They can be beautiful. But when we don't realize that we're playing this game all the time of consent and agreement to social contracts, it can become a problem. And it becomes a problem when we forget who we really are, and we forget that that social aspect is a role that we're playing for a particular reason, and that our identity is a method that we're using to achieve a particular outcome. So they're not solid in and of themselves, and they're not ends, they are means. These layers that come between consciousness and matter are means to achieve a certain thing. They're not ends in themselves. They can be appreciated, but they are tools, they are not masters. Your identity must not be a master, it must be a tool. And a simple example of being mastered by an identity or being mastered by a belief that comes as part of that identity is if someone sees me walking down the street and they shout, "Hey, dickhead," and I turn around. Does it mean that I'm a dickhead? Or does it just mean that I've identified as one? And I've self-identified, I've chosen, free will, to identify as a dickhead. You know? It's a funny one to think about, right? When someone treats you as something or makes the assumption that you are something and you react to that assumption, it says less about who you are and it says more about who you believe you are or who you've been taught that you are. So these assumptions, these things that we believe we are part of the culture. They're part of the conditioning. And this is where a lot of our resistance comes from, because once again, we're loyal to that belief. I'm more loyal to the thought that I'm a dickhead than I am to my enjoyable walk down the street, feeling the breeze on my skin and the sun on my face. So is that identity actually serving me? And to what extent do I even need to maintain an identity if I'm willing to feel the feelings that come with being misunderstood, and if I'm capable, practically capable, physically capable of taking care of myself? To what extent do I need to subscribe to a particular identity to belong to a particular social group or club? And so here we come into the belonging piece, because Obviously, we adopt these personas to belong and to feel safe and to function in society. And we don't want to be alone. So with that safety of the social group comes a particular risk, and the risk is that we become someone or act as though we are someone who we know we are not. We live a lie, that's the risk. So when we come back to this concept of the individual as an undivided whole, and then we think about what a community really is, because community is a beautiful thing. Community is that common unity with the whole. It's the commonality of the remembering that we are individuals. Community is what happens when individuals come together. Community is the result of whole individuals sharing space at the same time and moving sometimes towards particular values or goals together. The community, when it's healthy, when it's beautiful and when it's blooming, holds the space for the individual journey. The community holds the space for the individual journey in the same way that consciousness holds space for the body to change and shift. And if you know who you are, which is pure awareness, the being, the energy, having an experience, then you are at peace with that shift, because it must be so. The weather must change, things must move. That's the point. That's the point. If everything was static and nothing changed and everything was the same, what would there be to see? What human experience or story would there be to witness? And so community allows space for this. The strongest communities are the ones which allow the most space and are the most invested in connection, but the least invested in fixation and condemnation and certainty. If you can have a group of people who come together and choose to share space and time without the need for certainty, without the need to make up their mind about who everyone is and what everyone must do, that community, when there's also the ability to relate and connect, is powerful. And when we don't have that, the opposite end of the spectrum would be that in order to belong to our club, you have to wear a particular persona. And if you don't, you're out. The difference there is that it's a cult, because the individual isn't desired or desirable. The individual, an individuation and remembering represents a threat. And when remembering of truth and the purity of spirit and matter represents a threat, you're in a cult. And that cult is never going to be a place for original growth, authentic growth, right? It's never going to be a place where life can bloom and flowers can come out and puppies can roll around on the ground, and where we can wrestle and, you know, create stuff and build and do that in the most cohesive way. It's always going to be an almost version of that. It's always going to be a good enough version of that. It's only when the identity is surrendered for the suchness of the moment, as a collective, that we experience the exponential bloom that a collective can bring. Now, this is a level of operating in the world which is beyond what we see normally. In fact, it's a level of operating in the world that we may not even need to focus on. It may be enough to simply find a little bit deeper of a sense of belonging in oneself, one's body, consciousness in the body without resistance to what is. And I feel like when that is the focus, the community can reveal itself and organize itself more naturally. And community can also have an effect on the individual in helping the individual remember who they are. But it's not complicated, that's the point, right? It's not complicated. It's about removing distortions, and there perhaps needs to be a shared value there, in that the remembering of wholeness is more important than the validation of belief systems. This means the community isn't going to be formed of just your favorite experiences. It means that you're going to be called towards deeper insight and reflection often. It means that you will need to let go of who you think you are, often. But remember that that does not create a dilution of the self. It creates a distillation of the self. The dilution of the self happens when you remain stagnant and life moves on without you. The distillation of the self happens when you accept the motion that is occurring always, and you harmonize with and get up to date with the passing and the suchness and the flowing of the now, and you open your neural filters. Opening of the neural filters, willingness to feel feelings, willingness to update our operating system, willingness to meet the body's immediate needs and to move towards those and to speak them transparently with no sense of guilt or shame, but just understanding. These qualities and attributes make you potent and distilled. This is the irony. This is the beautiful thing. The more you release what is not you, the more distilled you become in what you are. And the more distilled you become in what you are, the more potent you are. The more potent you are, the more useful you can be. If the values of those in your circle are similar enough. But even if they weren't, even if you weren't in a place where there were shared values, even if you felt stuck in a society or a situation or a job which you were convinced wasn't going to develop with you, the fact you're so convinced of that is itself a persona. And yes, it may be based on past experiences, but once again, those past experiences were experienced through a certain persona. And when the persona changes, and when you relate differently to yourself, your field shifts too, because your field is made up of your perceptions and your reactions and the ways you interact with things and the cues that that creates for other things to move and respond a certain way. So when you relate differently to yourself and you move out in the world, your field has shifted and you will notice different things about the world. You will respond to different things. You will become non-reactive and allowing of certain things. And that essence, that way of relating, because it is almost mathematically more harmonious, it's more musical, it's more coherent, it's more adaptive, it's more present, it's based in the truth of what's arising, not what you think still exists but died 10 minutes ago. That truthfulness and that efficiency is like WD-40. It's like oil, it's that refined, watchful, released way of moving and seeing in the world. It seeps into the cracks between these clunky, gross, rocky bits, and it begins to find paths like water or like something finer than water. And so if you think of a jar, and the jar's full of rocks, and then there's pebbles, and then there's grains of sand, and then there's dust in the jar, right? Those big rocks, those clunky bits of experience, those stuck beliefs, they are representative of how out of touch with the suchness of now you are. Well, this is at least one way we can use this analogy. So think of, let's say that there's presence, there's suchness, there's isness, there's pure consciousness and pure matter, and that's here. And there's no distortion in the funnel. So consciousness or awareness and matter, just spirit and matter, they're just unified, a unified field. There's no friction, and so there's a no. Like there's never any friction. You never get stuck. You never get delayed in the distortion. You never get tangled and contracted, and you never slow down in your processing. But over here, there's this big rock that's stuck, rather than this dusty, fine mist of nowness. And that big rock represents when you're trying to tow a big, clunky belief into the present moment and project it onto the scenario at hand. And that is the resistance. It's difficult work to do that. It takes tremendous amounts of energy to attempt to sustain belief systems which no longer operate with the broader system. And so when you're in a situation you don't think is going to change, make sure you're not towing a big belief, and that belief isn't the thing that's draining you. Because often it's the belief that's draining you more than the circumstances. It's the fact you believe that belief. It's the fact that you're in resistance to the catching up of perception and truth. That's the draining thing. So when people say the truth hurts, it's because there's a sense of deviation from the truth, and that you've invested so intensely in that deviation that the course correction process hurts. Feels like it's tearing you apart, because it's breaking down that rock that you think is you, that belief system, that identity that you think is you, that's actually just holding you down, dragging you down to the bottom of the ocean. That is what you're breaking down. And so yeah, there's an intense process to do that. There's a grinding, there's a dissolution of the false self to turn you into the dust, which enables you to float in the wind of what actually is happening and to be where you're meant to be. So when you approach your life with that in mind, or with a remembering of that, because this is the base state, this isn't somewhere to get to, this is the default, and we choose to deviate from it, to collect stuff, to grip. It takes energy. But when you forget that and you remember that it's the base state, and then you rock up to your work or whatever, what's to stop you? You know, if identities are methods, and if beliefs are tools, and if the world is open and you're actually powerful, then what's to stop you from relating differently to it and seeing what happens? What's to stop you from approaching conversations with a little bit more surrender and then seeing what happens? It doesn't mean you're not going to leave the job that was terrible. You might still leave it, but perhaps that departure will eventuate in a more harmonious way. It might mean that you stay, and perhaps staying will actually feel really good. And you'll know that because there'll be more energy for you in your being, and there'll be a sense of clarity. And rather than walking through life with this heavy emotional burden, there'll be a sense that you're dealing with matters of practicality, but that your beingness is comfortable in your body, that there's no inner conflict. We move the internal conflict outward into this interactive, moment-to-moment, interesting puzzle when we reduce the resistance and the friction and the emotional charge and the clinging and the misidentification. And once again, to do this, all that is required is that you notice the layers and the constraints that are present. You don't need to go beyond that. A lot of people will hear this and they'll immediately say, okay, well, yeah, it's just so difficult to break down those layers, you know. No, yeah, because you don't have to do it yourself. That's not something you have to take care of. Life does that for you, and you simply keep listening, keep releasing the false self, keep grounding in the felt, sensory, direct knowing of where you are and what's happening, and keep disidentifying with the story. And that really just happens through watchfulness. Even the disidentification with the story, you don't have to push it away, you just notice that it's a story. Simply seeing things for what they are is enough. That does it. That does it. Truth doesn't need to defend itself. Truth is like a lion which, when unleashed, goes and wreaks havoc on all of the false. So simply return to that. That's what you are. It's thinking that you're not that which creates the idea that you have to then do all of this work to return back. Okay, so the last part I want to talk about here, releasing subconscious resistance to change, is the way we approach goals. So goals and aspirations and vision boards and Pinterest and all of that is okay, it's cool. If it's fun, great. And it can serve a purpose too. But it can also serve an inverse purpose. It can be life-giving, or it can be depleting. And as soon as it's depleting, you got to let it go. But the funny thing is, a lot of the things that are life-giving now, that you think are tricks or hacks to somehow get it right and be okay, prove to become clinging points that cause suffering later, Because rather than trusting in your innate okayness as a base resonance, you're trusting in a belief system which you think is going to get you what you want. And then when that belief system eventually doesn't get you what you want, or needs to be left behind or updated or dissolved, you think, oh no, but that's how I got here. But that's what got me here, so oh no, what am I going to do? A similar example could be if you're in a relationship that seems to just absolutely light up your life, right? And you're, oh my God, this is amazing. You wake up with a spring in your step. You think, oh, I found my person. You know, I experienced this. 5 hours sleep and I'm training the next day and I'm just feeling like I'm glowing, because the immensity of this feeling that I'd arrived where I was meant to be was so huge, and I saw that relationship as a big part of the reason why. So that's fantastic. But what's not so fantastic, and it's just part of the human story, it's part of the realization and part of the awakening, is that when it ended, there was an equal and opposite reaction. It's like physics. There was an equal and opposite drop. So I went just as deep as I'd gone high. And the reason is because I had placed my aliveness, my sovereignty, my wholeness, and my trust outside of the all, which is me, and into something particular. That's the answer. That piece right there. The intellect wants to grip, grab, be sure, fix, understand, localize, point to, and own. And then that gets ripped away because life needs to adjust, and life needs to tell you, hey, it's not just that, you're supported. Like, you are life, you are alive. That is enough. Consciousness and life is enough, and passing through your body, there'll be a natural inclination to move a particular way. And it's not something that comes from the thing outside of you, but the thing outside of you is the cue. It is the trigger. So what I now realize is, I can absolutely appreciate all of the sensations and all of the emotions that come with that relationship, but I'm also aware that to the degree I make the relationship the thing which has given me that, I also make it the thing that can take it all away. And to place your identification eggs all in one basket and to be birthed into that and then to die to that is quite an intense karmic process. It feels like a huge fucking thing, right? You're born and then it's a birth and a death, and you think that that's you being born and dying. And this is what reincarnation is in the daily sense. The sense that you identify over and over again with certain things, and then you're born and then you die, because those things come and they go. So you're in the wheel of samsara. You're swimming in these illusions, and of course that can be a wild ride. I think that a part of us kind of, or maybe that's what we're here for, who knows, but it is intense and it can take a toll on the body as well. The other way to live is to see the suchness of everything, that there's kind of this self-sustaining, equalizing system at play, and that you are utterly that. And so to utterly surrender to that means, I can never lose myself, because I'm everywhere. I'm what all of this is arising within. I'm the conscious space that it's arising in, so how can I lose myself? The things in the space can change, but how can I lose myself if I'm the space that they're changing in? That kind of way of living and that remembering brings a certain sense of, I'm falling and isn't it wonderful? I'm just drifting and isn't it wonderful? But also there's no fear in that, because you are the one that you're falling within. You're the one that you're drifting within. You are the space that is holding yourself as you surrender. And so when we look at the way neurology works and the way reality forms itself, what I'm talking about is a surrendering into the suchness. And surrendering into the suchness means you're held by the truth, because you're not in argument with the truth. You're not in argument with what is. And so what is holds you. And provided your loyalty is to the surrendering of delusion, and that's a process, day in, day out, breath to breath, you're always okay, because your intentions are always pure, because you're never trying to pull the rug over someone's eyes, or you're never trying to pretend that you're someone you're not. You're never trying to force reality in a direction it's not going. And so everything you experience, you then know is meant for you, because otherwise it wouldn't be here. And it takes no force, and yet it's present. So what a gift that is. And then naturally, from resistance, gratitude can arise, but not through a process of I'm going to be grateful so that I can achieve X. It's simply through a process of, well, I'm not forcing anything, and yet there is still something happening. And I'm not trying to be anything that I'm not, and yet I'm still so full of sensation and experience. So wow, what a gift this is. So in the base state, that's why people say bliss is one of the basic experiences. It's the removal of distortion. Beneath bliss, there is something that's even deeper, which is even more formless. But the body and our spirit matter body connection is blissful when the distortion in the middle is dissolving. Because the distortion between spirit and matter, like the identity distortions that we get stuck in, creates resistance in the body, and it creates this physical reflection of the being state in the body. So when there's no distortion in the being state through the simple remembering of what you are, the body is also in that remembering, and the parts come together. There's no longer this sense of everything being so separate and stuck, but there's a sense of fluid, energetic transmission and vibrancy through all of the being. It's like the subtle body comes online and fills the gross body. The tissues are filled with this sense of lightness and aliveness and release and listening. It's almost like you have this physical body, but the energy is permeable and can move so fluidly within it that you're resting in bliss. It's like you're floating on a waterbed at the same time as actually moving. But a lot of us won't experience that because we are too preferential about the way life goes. And we think that there's something that we can save ourselves from, and there's somewhere to go. This is so big. I get how big that could seem, to kind of release into just the suchness of life every moment. I get that that can seem like a huge thing, and I'm not always there. And there's degrees and there's an unfolding to how much we can do that. But I have absolutely experienced the state of dissolution of the false self through tremendous suffering and then a letting go. And the letting go created this sense that whatever happens, it doesn't matter. But not in a nihilistic way, but in a fullness of being and sensation way, where the directing, controlling intellect is surrendered and there's just this bliss in my body. And I was essentially ready to die. I was ready to die. But guess what? Your body doesn't just die because you're surrendering to the depths of whatever is. Your body comes alive when you surrender to the depths of whatever is. And it's this false self that you're trying to keep alive, the idea entity that is afraid of dying. Your body doesn't just die. When you remove resistance, your body's more alive than ever, okay? So when I talk about dying, it's kind of the death of the mind, the death of the separate mind that thinks it knows better than the fantastic complexity of everything. That incredible hubris, that incredible grandiosity, that can die. And what it's replaced with is this effortless, I'm held by my body. My body's got me. The world's got me. It's okay. All of the layers in between, all of the trauma, all of that, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It can be there. It doesn't matter. There's no resistance. So, yeah. Reducing subconscious resistance to change. You don't even have to. You don't even have to release subconscious resistance to change. Just remember who you are. Just remember that you're the one noticing all of it. And be willing to actually surrender the doubt about that. And be willing to speak that. Be willing to speak to what is true. And sometimes the truth sounds like, I don't know. I don't know. Be willing to speak that and be willing to feel what comes back and what comes up and what comes through. It's not that we have to figure it out. There's nowhere to get to. There's nothing to learn or to grip and remember. It's completely the opposite. And it's through our relationships that we construct these expectations about how to relate and how to do it. We create these agreements and these social contracts, and we consent to stepping into these false identities. We consent and we choose to step into them. And that's when we identify with the game layer and not the field that it's being played upon. So you don't need to enforce your will upon the world, because that's the game layer. You can explore that. You can play your games, other people's games, construct games, play word games, play identity games. Absolutely, like, why not? It's just a game. It's like soccer. Do whatever you want. But it's secondary. And so that layer is never going to be more powerful than the layer of remembering who you are in the field. It's never, that layer, anything that you do through this fancy trick of creating and hacking and gaming and trying to figure it all out, is never going to be greater than the energy given when you release distortion between consciousness and matter and just accept what is. Hope this has been a useful workshop for you. If you want to work with me, just reach out. If you have any questions, reach out. Have any queries or challenges to what I've said, reach out. I can make more content, all of that. It's really important. And I want to reiterate that this work isn't coming from the perspective of you need to agree with me. This work grows and is more useful to the extent that we can ask ourselves these inquiry questions and actually directly experience the curiosity space and directly experience an unfolding answer, which is kind of developing and never arriving. That's the essence of this, right? It's this living of life through an unfolding pace. And we bring all of ourselves through by remembering and by accepting and by being with what is. So the teaching unfolds, the learning unfolds, the remembering unfolds, and all of this should be verifiable in your own life. It should be verifiable. You don't have to buy in. Just pay attention to how your experience layers itself and builds itself. And think, where did that come from? And don't just jump in with an answer like my parents or my trauma. Where did that come from? Where did that come from? No, like, not where did it come from in the world, not where did it come from in the human game layer, who did what, when, and why. Where did that whole way of feeling and seeing the world come from? What does that sit within that is able to see it? That's the good stuff. That's the good stuff. So look out for assumptions and look out for moments when you are making a choice to react a particular way. And with that said, we'll finish the workshop. Much love. Thank you. Speak to you soon.